Welcome to both our panelists and our attendees. We're very excited to have you here today. This session is a bit of an extension of the roundtable on good policymaking that we ran to start off the new year 2023, and it generated a lot of interest, and we're very excited to follow it up with this very important topic. We have seen in the policy space a lot of disillusionment with policymaking. It feels removed from citizens, and so bringing policymaking closer to the citizens is something that I believe is going to be very important as we look to the future on the next 10 years ahead. And how we are able to do that at the city level is a very exciting question, because at the city level, we have a lot more local engagement, and it's a lot closer to the people already. And so we brought you a very exciting panel that brings together a number of different perspectives, both from policymaking, from academia, and we're going to see what approaches are out there right now, what best practices and challenges are, and what new approaches could look like in the future. So we're going to start off with Dr. Kristina Reinsalu from Estonia. She is Program Director of e-Democracy at the E-Government Institute. And she's going to give us an overview of what engagement looks like in the digital space and what innovative formats are out there. Then we have two policymakers at the city level from the UK joining: Tomas Johnson, who's a senior planner in the Neighbourhood Planning and Engagement team at the Leeds City Council, and Luke Rakes, who is both a city councillor in Manchester as well as research director at the Fabian Society. And they each have experience in engaging their citizens at the city level, and are going to share some of the challenges they've experienced with formats that aren't working, and especially how to include populations that aren't necessarily the first to participate in citizen engagement. So how to open it up to a more diverse set of voices is going to be a big topic there. And then we're going to finish off the panel presentations with Martijn de Vries, who's joining us from the Netherlands. He's a lead researcher at Populytics and a PhD candidate at the Technical University of Delft. And he, along with a number of colleagues, developed a new approach to online citizen engagement, and basically deepening the deliberation that citizens can join, that a broader range of citizens can join the deliberation, and that we can see not only the few who manage to meet in person, but that we can open it up to a larger group of citizens. And it's a very exciting new method that I was very excited about when I first heard about it. And I'm very glad for the panel to start off now with Kristina. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, once again, it's my pleasure and honor to be with you today. And I'm going to, I consult on my everyday work. I consult, research, and train local governments and central governments and civil society organizations on how to use technology to improve the interaction with citizens. But my passion is really local democracy, because this is really a good test bed for all democratic innovations. So today I'm going to share some very concrete showcases on crowdsourcing and co-creation in cities. So this four C stories, so to say. And one of them is trajectory. Tartu City has been through, starting from participatory budgeting to much more systematic crowdsourcing and co-creation. And second story will be how we did very concrete real-time experiment and crowdsourced on air quality in Tallinn. So starting from Tartu City, co-creation, crowdsourcing and co-creation story. We started from participatory budgeting. I'm not going to elaborate what it means. I'm pretty sure that everybody here in this space knows what it is, but I would just highlight how well the model which we implemented, we designed and implemented, we as my organization being externally expert and consultant for City of Tartu, that we sort of found ourselves back in 2013 in a situation where we realized that many municipalities, many cities in Estonia, they were promising much more open governance, engagement of citizens, but say sort of lacked good framework or model for doing this, or structure or shape. And so we understood that this is something, this model could really give them very good tool and help both sides, citizens, what does it mean to participate actively, and cities, what does it mean to engage meaningfully. And so we started to implement. Of course, we had many challenges, and I'm also briefly stopping on them, but it resulted to be a real impact story in a way that the model we use, that citizens submit their ideas on how to transform public space around them, online, offline, all different tools and platforms are enabled, then experts will give their really meaningful input and provide impact analysis to ideas. There will be also, which is very important, there is always deliberation face-to-face stage where all orders of ideas, experts are deliberating on ideas, and then only when citizens are informed enough, they can make their informed decision. And this model resulted to, or was working so well that now it has basically rooted in all different decision-making processes of the city. By the way, Tartu City will be European Cultural Capital 2024, sorry, my mistake, 24 next year. And even the whole program was crowdsourced using basically and co-created with citizens using basically the same similar PP model we used from the beginning. And there are also all sorts of, I must say, it doesn't sound well, but COVID was somehow even a trigger to even amplify this hybrid way of really crowdsourcing online ideas, deliberating all sorts of urban issues, urban planning issues. So in placemaking, this is basically the model combination on offline and online deliberations and crowdsourcing, and finally co-creating final programs or policies or regulations has become a norm. And but in terms of challenges, we have faced many, and one very crucial question which started from PB was that, I mean, at the same time, citizens are very pragmatical and they should be having always the possibility and right to signal problems. At the same time, we as consultants, and probably I assume cities also, we want to get very, very innovative ideas, a lot of creativity, how to kind of boost this. So I think that the solution is that you should still try to make all this engagement process very playful, really. And we added several elements. We also provided orders of ideas, different trainings on how to market their ideas to make the whole process much more attractive also to participants. Also, one of the big question marks always is how much digital it should be, all this engagement or crowdsourcing or co-creating, or how much it is still needed to keep these non-digital elements. And our answer is that really that the best, the most successful examples and initiatives are those who combine those both. Also in BB, we also use all platforms, but at the same time, we even bring the ideas to the city space so people basically can touch them literally, the ideas, and understand much better what is this all about. But one conclusion is that really, I mean, it doesn't matter, digital cannot be aim itself, because I mean, I have very good example of one local initiative where citizens were just enabled to spin the wheel, like physical wheel, to signal the crucial problems and provide solutions in the closest neighborhood. So it doesn't necessarily need to be digital. And my other showcase is about how we crowdsourced ideas, how we crowdsourced on air quality. So citizens were in Tallinn city, and it was part of one project. We did it parallelly. My partners were doing this in Lisbon and Burgas and Riga and other European cities. We did it in Tallinn. In 12 months, basically citizens of Tallinn mapped the problems, provided solutions, selected and prioritized solutions, and co-created with experts new regulations, policies. And what I think was most surprising, positively surprising for me as consultant, was really the problem-solving phase that citizens, after mapping that one of the biggest problems for them when they sensed the pollution and the problems with air quality was, of course, transportation, and so but also other challenges. But the way they argumented their proposals, their new ideas, solutions, for me, it was very impressive. Of course, cities always, and this is now, I mean, comes to that of course, citizens are never experts. And sometimes the biggest problem is really to make cities understanding that and city administrations have that it still makes a lot of sense to listen to citizens, and probably, yes, this is next phase is really to provide this extra expertise and to deliberate on ideas. But at the same time, I was really surprised how practical, how concrete citizens were signaling and providing solutions, like, I don't know, one idea about inter-university bicycle highway and other very concrete ideas, really spotting on really the problems. And the final phase was really like co-writing basically the new policy regulations with experts. And this is now going to European level as well. And of course, we cannot skip AI. And so to conclude also that now we are, with our Icelandic partners, we are experimenting with AI also on the same platform, same initiatives, same projects. that now I see that this could be really a good stimulator or trigger for citizens. So probably this is, I would say that I think that human beings will be and should be also still the those who should signal the problems and sense the problems and signal them. But where I see a lot of use and importance and really where AI can help is really to help to sort out the solutions and really to attract other citizens also to get into those ideas. And then this is huge potential, I think, also to use AI in this sense to sort out the ideas, to help you dig into those ideas, to find out different opinions. And really, just to summarize, the key success factors of this last showcase, is crowdsourcing and co-creating on air quality, have been that continuity is one of the keywords, really, that we use several platforms during one process. This was a big mistake. I mean, you should keep all your participants on one space, not losing anybody. So continuity and you should really, I mean, publish and communicate on every step, and this transparency and continuity is key issue. Context is what matters always when we talk about engagement and digital engagement. I mean, really, it's very hard to attract citizens and invite and engage them in Green Deal issues if basically literally the war is knocking on your door, as we experience. So this is consider always context, and communication is just, you cannot skip that. Every single digital engagement needs so much extra support activities also offline. And yes, this is it. Basically, my key takeaway is really that use external experts to help you as a city, or being a city. Start small, but start now. And of course, digital tools should not be a goal itself, but they can support, they can amplify, and really have fun, because any engagement should be fun as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristina. That was excellent. A wealth of material there. Great to see the work that you've been undertaking, and we'll hear more from the panel, I'm sure. But we'll move on now to our second speaker, which is Tomas Johnson, the Senior Planner, the Neighbourhood Engagement Team in Leeds City Council. Tomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this event. I'm really excited to hear and share some of the work that we've been doing in Leeds. So as we just said, I'm part of the Neighbourhood Planning and Engagement Team, which works really closely with communities across the whole of our city. And today I'm going to talk to you about neighbourhood planning more generally and how we can empower more deprived communities to get involved. So I never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Now, I believe this quote perfectly encapsulates the power that local people have in the development of their communities, cities, and the world. Democracy provides an environment in which the freely expressed will of the people is exercised, where citizens have the power to enact change in their community. And a healthy and democratic planning system is one where local people are actively engaged in the development of their communities. So to begin with, I'd like to provide you with a bit of context about Leeds. And I like to think of Leeds as a microcosm of the entire UK. So some of our citizens are living in the most affluent rural areas with ample green space surrounded by the green belt and benefit from socio-economic advantages. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, in 2019, it was recorded that over 180,000 people in Leeds lived in an area that ranked amongst the most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. And not surprisingly, these areas are largely located in the inner areas of the city. And we know that we, like a lot of other local authorities in the UK, have struggled to engage with less affluent communities. And this means that so many people are not using their voice to influence future growth in their neighbourhood or the city as a whole. Urban planning can be a complex and time-consuming thing to be part of, and even as a planner, we cannot be experts in every aspect of planning. So with the average citizen working a full-time job, maintaining a household and trying to pay the bills, how can we expect them to fully engage with the planning system at the end of their working day? People in deprived communities are faced with additional challenges that those in non-deprived and affluent areas are not, and often experience difficulties with job security and low wages, low educational attainment, and often poor health. And as such, these deprived communities are less likely to be active in the planning process, and so development can often just happen without local people using their voice. And this can lead to a cyclical narrative, because people have limited engagement with the planning system, they have limited influence on future growth, and thus there tend to be low levels of development in these communities. And so part of our role as planners is to change this narrative and to empower people to change the world. So why am I here? What is neighbourhood planning? So neighbourhood planning was introduced to the English planning system in 2011 with the Localism Act, and it's an important tool which empowers groups of thoughtful, committed citizens to create a vision for their neighbourhood, which will guide and influence future development. It's about the use and development of land and contains planning policies, proposals for improving the area, and allocating key sites for development. They can deal with a wide range of social, economic, and environmental issues, including housing, employment, design, and transport. A neighbourhood plan must be endorsed by the local community by receiving more than 50% of the vote at a local referendum. And if successful at referendum, it forms part of the local development plan and is used to assess planning applications in that neighbourhood. So neighbourhood planning is planning for local communities by local communities and is an incredibly democratic method of planning. So how does neighbourhood planning look in Leeds? In Leeds, we currently have 20 made neighbourhood plans. The map on screen shows the Leeds district. Every area represented in red and green are the communities which have yet to finish their neighbourhood plan. What is interesting about this image, though, is that most communities that have successfully created a neighbourhood plan are in the northeast of the city, highlighted in blue and purple. These are our most affluent areas. And on the other hand, the communities with neighbourhood plans still to be created are concentrated within the inner parts of the city, which is our most deprived communities. This links back to the issue that I raised earlier, that deprived communities are struggling to engage in the planning system and having their voices heard, even with a more democratic tool such as neighbourhood plan. So how do we encourage and support more deprived communities to participate in the planning process? At present, Leeds City Council are part of the national pilot study, which is aimed at encouraging more people in urban and deprived areas to engage in the planning system. We're testing out whether a community priority statement is a more appropriate method of neighbourhood planning for more deprived communities. The pilot covers 3 areas in inner East Leeds: Hare Hills, Chapeltown, and Madgate, Lincoln Green and Bermontos. To assist these groups, we're working on simplifying the normal material that we provide neighbourhood forums with, and condensing other useful information into simpler, more accessible documents in order to break down the barriers to accessing planning information. We're also absorbing a lot of the administrative work so that communities can spend more time discussing the issues and their plans for the future, rather than being bogged down in tedious tasks. We're exploring how we can include both planning and non-planning issues, how we can engage with disconnected residents, what the documents will look like, and what status they should have. And despite the many questions around them, and perhaps a degree of vagueness at this early stage, communities are quite positive about the speed that these documents can be prepared, the opportunity to include all issues that are important to them, and the opportunity to explore what could work for more deprived inner city areas. We as a planning community need to do more to empower and support inner city and deprived communities to believe that they, a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, can not only bring about positive change to their communities, but to the city and to the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was a really fascinating perspective, and I'm super excited about this new pilot study. And I just a follow-up question: when do you think there's going to be first results on like how effective these different methods were at bringing together more citizens?
So the communities are looking to have created their neighbourhood priority statement by October. So we're just about to go out for the first round of consultation with the communities, and then probably summer next year we'd have some results about how successful it's been, so we need to report back to government and stuff. So
very exciting. Thank you so much again, Thomas. And now we're moving over to Luke, who's providing another perspective from the UK, from Manchester, on their experience with citizen engagement.
Thank you for having me. I don't have any slides, I'm afraid, so you'll have to suffer with my face instead. So my experience, as Henriette mentioned, is as a councillor for 11 years, standing down in May, in fact. But before that, I was a community organiser, which got me involved in local politics in the first place. I've also worked with Andy Burnham on his manifesto here, and we crowdsourced some of the solutions there as well. And so people are aware we have a strategy in Manchester, or we did have really, called Our Manchester, similar to the Wigan deal, which people might be familiar with, which has a sort of different way of working with the VCSE sector at its heart. So I suppose before I sort of move on to the 3 priorities for this agenda, which are mentioned in the essay that was circulated, I think it's really important to be very aware of the context, which the other speakers have mentioned as well. This is crucial. You have to sort of see this agenda from the perspective of the people that you're trying to engage. And at the moment in the UK, certainly, we have plenty of challenges. People are particularly time poor, which very much relates to this agenda, particularly if you're also poor in the conventional sense as well. So the poor communities that we have don't have much time to contribute their own time to such initiatives. And that's got to be a starting point rather than, I think, an afterthought for a lot of this discussion. I think more generally, in stepping back from the whole situation, the challenges that we face in our communities and in our country do primarily, I would say, relate to things that the state needs to do in a conventional sense. So while a lot of this work is very important and can make that better, I think we do need to be clear, as is sometimes not the case, that this isn't a way of overturning some of the ways that we currently work. It's a way of improving them rather than replacing them. And that, I suppose, relates to the first point, is that when we do this work, we have to be very clear and very specific, and also honest about the limitations of this kind of participatory and direct democracy. It isn't, as sometimes people often presented as, a replacement for representative democracy that we have. They might expect me to say that. It isn't a revolution, and it will not help us to tackle the more severe problems that we have at the moment, except at the margins. I think it's quite important to say that. The reason that I do feel the need to say that is that there is a lot of jargon in this space. There is a lot of excitable language, and I think we're all probably familiar with it. And that can, I think, be an obstacle to doing good policy, and doing good policy in an inclusive way if we're talking a language that people don't understand, or being unclear about the limitations of what we're trying to achieve. I think also, and the second challenge in this agenda is to be equal and inclusive. And I think the other speakers have talked from their experiences and their examples really effectively to that point. In my experience, the type of people who would tend to show up to these sorts of things in person or even online or contribute to these sorts of things tend to be people who are already relatively powerful. So you can end up embedding and entrenching inequalities if you don't do this right. Now, that is not a new problem, and a lot of this agenda is relatively old as well. There are ways of overcoming it. But as you've heard from the other speakers, they take a lot of effort. I think we do need to be clear that we need to put a lot of effort in to do these things properly. It requires professionalism, it requires resource. And sometimes trying to do these things but doing them badly, it can often be worse than not doing anything like this at all, because you're sort of sometimes replacing the conventional methods, which for their flaws can be better than doing this participatory direct democracy badly. The final point is that I think we need to improve the representative democracy that we do have. I say this having spent 11 years as a local councillor in Manchester, so you might expect me to say that. But I think this does relate to how we empower communities through the conventional representative ways, and how the direct and participatory democracy can relate to those and can improve those. Within the UK, we're more centralised than any comparable nation. We are incredibly centralised here, as people outside the country might not be aware of, in fact, but we're very centralised and very unequal. And so we do need to devolve far more power to our councils and to our mayors. And that can in turn lead to more engagement with the populations within those places. As again, and Kristina said at the beginning, the local level is where you can get a lot of that engagement. Trying to, as some of the proposals propose instead, sort of circumventing councils and giving directly to communities instead, or else sometimes some of these proposals involve replacing some of the functions that councils have, the limited ones that have in this country. And I think we should in fact see them and try to strengthen our local democracy as a way of improving direct democracy as well. Thank you for your time, and apologies for not having some pretty slides like the other two speakers did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. Those are really important points to raise, especially this idea of doing it right. And if you can't do it right, then rather not doing it at all. The time poverty, I think, is a really interesting argument too. And we have Kristina here, as well as Martin, who work online in settings that potentially allow for a more time efficient way to engage. And I think Martin in particular works on how to make that the engagement in depth as well as time efficient. So I'm very excited to hand over to him to present the methodology developed by his team.
Yes, thank you very much. So today I'll be talking about participatory value evaluation, which is a method for online consultation developed by the TU Delft University, where I'm currently a PhD candidate and I work at Populytics, which is a spin-off of that university. And what we do is we empower policymakers to make decisions that better align with the values and concerns of stakeholders by putting this method into practice. It's being used in the Netherlands on a national scale. For example, we consulted 30,000 people for COVID policies that actually lead to concrete alterations in the national strategy. We use it for national energy and climate consultations, but we also use it at the local level. And today I'm going to focus on that. In a nutshell, what is a PVE consultation? In an online setting, citizens are put in the chair of a policymaker. So what we do is we really simulate the choice situation. Citizens see the different policy options that are available. They see various effects of these options. For example, what are the costs? What is the effect on noise pollution? What is the effect on how much space is needed? And they have to make choices, giving this information and sticking to limitations. So they have a limited budget or they have a limited CO2 emission. And so they really feel the pain that policymakers also feel. And it's then they give an advice that we can analyze with choice models. And they also provide qualitative motivation that we analyze. Most of our people working are philosophers or philosophers and economists. And we also use AI to analyze these motivations of like thousands of people. Now, just briefly, it was already touched upon by all the three speakers before me. There are different participatory needs and pathways, as we call them. This is in Dutch, but it's quite easy. Some people, we use this analogy, like to take a quick hike on a holiday. So which is similar to a referendum. where you just say yes or no. And there are some people, and we see most participatory methods are geared towards the more intensive people that want to take the longest hike possible. So citizens' nights or a citizen assembly where you spend a lot of nights talking about a policy issue. But a large amount of people are limited in their times because they have children, they're busy working. And yeah, these methods do not really cater to them, or it's not nuanced enough. And this is where this method really steps in. I'll show you some examples in a minute so that you can see. But really, yeah, the pros, everyone can participate. It takes a relatively small amount of time, 15, 20 minutes. Low participation threshold, so large and diverse groups of people participate, allowing also the silent minority to express nuanced views. And we see that lower educated people, for example, are very positive about this method. Funnily enough, even more positive than higher educated people. I'll leave the other points for now. Moving to the cases that we did for the municipality of Amsterdam, which is really committed to what we're talking to today as a city, experimenting with public collective partnerships and a more like collaborative governance approach. In the past 2 years, we have conducted 3 case studies for them. I will be presenting 2. But first, very briefly, why is citizen participation important? The literature distinguishes 3 reasons for this. First, it's an instrumental reason. It can lead to more support, acceptance of policies. And the second is substantive. It can lead to better decisions because citizens contribute knowledge that is new. And the third is normative. So yeah, democracy there means that you have to involve citizens. 3 cases that we did really fall within these categories. There was some overlap, of course, but I will be presenting the first 2. First was de-escalating a wind energy conflict in Amsterdam, which really led to more support and acceptance through this PVE. And the second was a PVE used for the Transport Authority to evaluate transport projects and contributing knowledge, local knowledge. The first project, wind energy, was a major conflict in Amsterdam about 1.5 years ago after the aldermen decided that the municipality will be building 17 windmills. It was the publication of this map with some potential areas, which led to a huge conflict of the advocates and the proponents of this policy were really loud. The municipality even had a respondents time to emails of 3/4 of a year because they were spammed with all this anger and people that were upset about this. So what we did is we made a PVE consultation so that in the end, 2,000 people could participate in this issue. Like, what do we have to do with these windmills? And give an advice about the requirements for this policy. It was then also fed into a more offline participation method as well. So this is not only online and then everything is fixed. I have to say that as a side note, but I'll focus on what the PVE was about. So as you can see in this screen, participants were given many policy options. It's in Dutch, but some were, for example, more strict regulations for the noise pollution or not near a natural area. But they cannot choose all of them because if they choose too many, the municipality's target of at least 50 megawatts would not be reached. So they really felt this pain and they saw a lot of effects. So for example, what are the costs? How many people are hindered by these extra windmills? And then they had to give an advice and they had to motivate them. What did this lead to? 2,000 people participated, and we really saw that there were some shared values that all people from different groups had, such as health and sustainability was important. But interpretations of these values differed. For example, some said, yeah, we should take responsibility, but for protecting health of citizens, and the others were more concerned with responsibility for mitigating climate change. Bringing these different views and presenting them in a report, and then also discussing them with citizens in sounding boards really highlighted that there was some common ground about the values that people shared. It decreased the number of incompatible objectives. So some options were now chosen by different people that were both proponents and opponents of these policies. So for example, there was accepted that, okay, in the harbor of Amsterdam, windmills are fine and we can move on. And it was actually presented in a report drafted by both the proponents and the opponents of windmills together. So it led to de-escalating the conflict. People started talking again and moving forward. And just really briefly, because I see I'm running out of time, the second case about the Transport Authority in Amsterdam. Here, it was not a conflict. It was just we want to improve the city. What projects should we choose? People could choose from 16 projects, allocating money over them. Again, meeting a limit, they could only spend 100 million of 400 millions of the costs in total. And this really provided, I'm going to just skip the examples, really interesting results compared to the traditional methods where experts do a cost-benefit analysis. You see in this table the desirability of the project in percentages in the PVE, and on the right, the cost-benefit analysis, the ranking. And what we saw is that the projects that improve safety, that were geared towards pedestrians and cyclists, really scored higher in the PVE. One reason for that is that citizens take into account these ethical considerations. For example, that we should stimulate that people get out of their cars. Considerations like these that are not included if you just make an expert judgment based on economic models. And this gave a really rich perspective in a lot of arguments and reasons to make different changes to the city, which was implemented in Amsterdam and led to a new trajectory where we're going to just continuously do this to make citizen decisions in Amsterdam about transport policies. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for Martin. That was to Martin. This was a fascinating methodology, and I actually have a question to kick off the discussion to you, Martin, to Kristina, because you work a lot with online formats, and also, of course, to Luke and Thomas. How do you navigate this trade-off between the complexity of policymaking, what options are out there, what implications do they have, and then inclusivity, as in lowering the barriers to participation, because that's a very difficult balance to strike.
Yeah, it is. And it's a large part of our work is really discussing with policymakers that want to include all the complexity and the experts that we consult, because everything is important. But then us, on the other hand, saying, well, we want this to be inclusive for everyone. So one thing we always do is we work with language experts to make sure that it's on B1 language level. We use animators and voice actors to make animations that really capture the essence of the policy issue. But it also really involves saying to experts, this is important, but we put it in a note somewhere in the, so a pop-up menu, it's not important for most citizens. And really make sure that you grasp the essential part of it, which is something that you should be able to do as a policymaker.
Yeah, well, maybe I just compliment. I think Luke also mentioned this language is really important. My background is media and communication, so for me, it's sometimes even very painful to listen to policymakers and even experts and really try to. So I many times take this kind of translator or interpreter role, even almost voluntarily, really to try to change the messages and transform them all the time. So yeah, I mean, mostly the challenge is not, I mean, technology is not the challenge or anything else, but really the language, the communication, and how to bring the people and experts and policymakers in the same space in this sense.
Yeah, I think language is a big thing that we're finding with our inner city communities, where there's lots of different languages spoken within one community. And it's trying to identify which is the most important one. I think not the most important, but the most spoken one in the area. And with one of the communities we're working with, they're working with an arts organisation as well, just to try and have a more physical version of, I guess, what Martin was talking about, having that sort of animators and the voice actors by making it more accessible through art, which we're finding is getting a lot more people involved in that conversation. Even though there are still language barriers, people are still getting involved, which is really good to see.
Thanks. We have a question from Iona Rossi in the chat, which is how high was the cost to undertake a cost-benefit analysis of 60 transport projects?
I don't know what the costs were, because I was not involved in doing those, but it was not too high. That's I know in the Netherlands, and I think it's also the same in UK and many Western European countries, there are these standardized numbers that you can use. And the people that, for example, in the Transport Authority, there are a lot of cost-benefit analysis experts that just can push this out really quite easily in the first stage. If you then go later on in the project planning, and then you have to do a more specific one, that could be more costly. But the first evaluative cost-benefit analysis don't have to be for smaller projects don't have to be very, very costly. But I don't know the exact cost.
That's a great question, though. I would be curious, how does the cost of doing a PVE evaluation compare to the cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah. What we do, I know from another project we are working on now, we're doing a PVE about a new national train going from Amsterdam to Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. And there has been, in these kind of projects, it's mandatory to do a cost-benefit analysis. And that has been done before. And we are now collaborating with that party consultation group that done that CBA. And the cost is about the same. So it's not much higher. But the PVE brings way more information to the policymakers, way more depth than just this numbers game. And it's really exciting because the people working on that cost-benefit analysis also saw this and like, wow, okay, we might have to adopt this approach more often, even for these kind of bigger projects.
Luke,
thanks for that. I'd encourage everyone who has further questions to put them in the chat box or to use the hand raise functionality. You can be brave and go on camera and ask the question. I have one touching on something that Luke, you said in your presentation, which is around, I guess there's a critical view on this, which is that sometimes these mechanisms are used to replace traditional democratic forms of engagement. So if you want to maybe talk a little bit about how these can either complement or potentially be antagonistic towards what we think of traditionally as local democracy.
Yeah, no problem. I think often it's about the rhetoric more than the practice. And I think it's not everybody, of course, but there does seem to be sometimes people will frame these direct democracy initiatives in the context of a lack of trust in elected representatives. And they can be a way to build trust, of course, but if they're sort of presented as an alternative, and so sometimes people propose giving grants directly from central government to communities without going via local councils and things like that. So those are not always the best ways to do things. And sometimes I won't pick a particular example, but if you're going to have a community-led project, it is important that the whole community is involved. And if they're not all involved, then you go to tell that community that it's community-led, then the people who are not involved in it are going to get extra annoyed. And I was quite interested in Martin's conflict de-escalation example. We do sometimes have severe conflicts in that sense when people are told you're leading this initiative, sometimes quite controversial, when they don't feel like they've been engaged at all. And in some ways, people would prefer the representatives they have to make those decisions and to be held accountable via elections. So there's a way of sort of navigating these things if you're sensible. But again, it does require sort of stepping back and being clear and honest about the respective roles of representatives, authorities and citizens in making decisions. And again, back to Martin's examples of sort of cost-benefit analyses and wider engagement together, I think those can be really good, but you won't want to have just one or just the other. Of course, you kind of need to have both, and we suffer in the UK especially of having these cost-benefit analyses dominating everything and ruling out lots of quite important projects that even common sense would dictate should be done. So the Scottish Borders Railway was pushed forward by the Scottish Government against cost-benefit analysis, turned out to be positive, for example. So relying on those statistics is also a mistake, I think.
That is a really interesting perspective on these different ways of doing things: traditional representative democracy, citizen engagement in traditional, more offline settings and online settings. And we have a great question on the chat, actually, up for grabs. How do we measure success with participatory approaches? Perhaps Luke, as a policymaker, what is successful? What is meaningful information from citizen engagement for you?
Well, as I mentioned at the start, I think there are different methods of engagement, and so it will depend on that method. I think it relates to some of the things that I think Martin was saying very clearly. If it's an instrumental benefit, then better, more efficient policy is an outcome. And I know that sounds quite sort of dry and technocratic, but in the context where certainly in the UK our public services are keeling over, that's got to be the priority. It is just more effective, more efficient public services. And if, as in some cases, this can help to deliver those, then that is a success, and that is a priority, I would argue, as well.
Has any of the three of you ever actually delved into measuring or like applying any type of quantitative or qualitative measure in this space? I know this is something inherently difficult to measure, but
no, we have some standard validity questions. And there's also some people working in the TU Delft. Another colleague of mine, her whole PhD is about these type of validity questions. So we ask, for example, validity, face validity. So our participants, do they feel like, could they really participate in a meaningful way? Was it understandable? So more on that side. We also ask questions as, so would you be more inclined to accept a certain outcome now that you have participated, in different phrasings? But and we see that this can vary in trajectories. And one very interesting one that we always ask is, so now that you've participated in this consultation, what do you think should happen with the advice of all these citizens? Should we listen to that? Should we listen to experts? Should we listen to both? And it's very interesting to see that a very large amount consistently says we should definitely also weigh in the view of experts. In our COVID studies, it was even a lot higher, like 40% said listen to the experts. I don't know. In more urban settings, we see that it's lower, and people say also listen to citizens, but that's very sparsely the case that citizens say just listen to me. And that's why we also say, agreeing with Luke, that this should really be to enrich in the debate, but not just to replace the representative democracy altogether.
Yeah, I would probably add that I really like I think Luke mentions this very important is manage expectations. I think that here policymakers and local administrations say really think or overrate the satisfaction with final outcome of citizens, because actually citizens are, I don't know, it's much more important for them the whole process, and exactly as it has been mentioned earlier, that they are listened, and the quality of this discussion, and even with this extra value for them to listen the other arguments and really having these discussions, and the outcome is not as important as policymakers and municipalities are thinking it is. So I think this is really underrated, this citizens, acceptance of even if their ideas or submissions or contributions are not implemented, they accept it much easily when justifications and explanations are given than municipalities or policymakers are thinking they will do. This is also very important.
I think as well from a local council perspective, we've recently adopted a new strategy of community involvement, and with that we've got 3 main targets, where one of them is to ensure that we are actively engaging with every ward in our community, in our city. The second is to ensure that we are having positive responses from the public as well with the material we're providing, and I think a lot of my work has been to ensure that the material we are providing people with is much more engaging, and that can be a bit difficult with the resources that we have got as a local authority, particularly with budget cuts and everything. And then finally, it's to ensure that we are engaging with young people, because we find that young people typically don't get involved with planning at all. So this has been through strategic approaches to go to local schools, local colleges, and have just open days there where we can just speak to local children about these issues. We're also working with other authorities and other companies as well, try and come up with much more engaging ways to engage children with the issues that we're discussing, because giving them a survey can be quite a boring thing. So we're looking at some like gamifying the process as well, and we're excited to see how that's going to turn out in the future.
That's great. Yeah, I think that comes to my next question on kind of hard to reach groups. That's an example of reaching out to hard to reach groups. So other panelists have other ways in which those who maybe are not always participating in the process can be engaged with this kind of activity.
Yeah, I was thinking how to reach hard to reach groups is always a challenge in every trajectory we do. And what we always notice is when we talk with policymakers, it has to be inclusive. And then, okay, what do we mean with that? Because as a value, that's very nice, but concretely, what does it mean? And now we've really developed this approach where we specify based on the policy issues. For example, 1 year ago, we did a national consultation about this law in the Netherlands about when do you lose your driving license as you become older and maybe are not able to drive anymore. And for that consultation, because it is involved elderly people, we also made a version that was like way simpler even than B1 language level. So A1 with bigger pictures and everything. And we sent it to, and we went to like care homes and to really, and we did it on iPads with these elderly people. So there we made an effort to reach that group, but we did one for direct democracy in Amsterdam, the West District. And there are these two neighborhoods that are really low in representation in most participatory methods. And there we went on the street to these two neighborhoods. So it's really, and with the youth, we also recognize that. So we often go to schools and give this as a kind of like in class for the politics lessons. So it really depends. And so there's no quick and easy answer, but I think a good approach is to see what is meant, what are the groups that are important for a certain policy issue, because otherwise it becomes too much. And then our experience is that nothing happens. And that's even worse.
Thank you, Martin. And we have a comment in the chat from Iona. Do you want to ask that question on camera, or are you happy just to be in the chat?
Yes, I found it fascinating. I like all this because coming from both academic and policy making and evaluation background myself. But I don't agree always that it is lack of trust on the representatives. And this is the reason to use the participatory democracy. A lot of times, people who don't agree with a project, even small project, an extension, and then can stop, could be one or two people, and it can stop, residents can stop the project going ahead because they have raised a complaint, where the majority might agree on that. So participatory democracies then can bring the voices of everybody, and I can make clear and obvious to the ones who don't agree that the majority agrees, and that it's not just the representatives who want a particular project to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Iona. Any initial responses to that from our panel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that might have been directed towards me as it was a point that I raised. So yeah, I'm happy to agree. In fact, that I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that it can do, but shouldn't. I suppose it's yeah, in some situations it can be a way of circumventing, but I would say that it's more important to use these, as related to my point, more important to use these forms of engagement to improve relationships with your representatives, and to widen participation rather than allowing the things that you've described there to happen and to overly sway people. So it's about doing both better rather than doing one instead of the other, if that makes sense.
That is actually a fantastic way to conclude the session, to say that we need both and we need to do both well. We have an ongoing discussion in the chat on where the power lies between representatives of the people and the people themselves. So this is a really great discussion. Do we want to have any final words from the panelists? Any thoughts that didn't pop up in the discussion yet? Otherwise, I would be happy to hand over to Jeremy to conclude the session for us and welcome everyone to engage in the chat and or after the event via the IPPO website and via email if you so choose.
Thank you, Harriet, and thank you to our four speakers today, to Kristina Reinsalu, to Thomas Johnson, Luke Griggs, and Martin de Vries. Thank you all for attending our session. Let's continue the conversation. You can tweet us at IPPO UK, and look forward to seeing you from the Presenters event very soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.